But thank you so much. And thank you, Britta, and thank you, Leonda, because actually this talk is giving a segment of knowledge about what will inform our design. And the area that I'm going to be speaking about is actually the reading brain and how it is changing under our influences of different mediums. So the first thing I want to say simply is that our brain never, ever was meant to read. It is a circuit that is developed from an invention of the species. And as such, it's plastic. It is actually the basis for so very much of learning. Now, the question that so many of us will have is the dilemma that we face, beauty versus threat. And I'm actually going to be using Nicholas of Cusano's dictum years and years, centuries ago, in which he says, what do we do to resolve the opposition of two truths? And he suggested that we have a stance of learned ignorance from which we look at the advantages and the disadvantages through the basis of knowledge. And I want to begin actually with something, Leonda, that was in your 5 Rights from Sherry Turkle. It is not the innovation that's the problem. As she said, we transgress not because we try to build the new, but because we do not allow ourselves to consider what it disrupts or diminishes. And it's in this spirit that I want to talk to you about what the basis of so much of children's learning is, literacy, how our various aspects of technology impact that for the good and the ill. And I'm actually wanting to begin with a novelist, with literature. And the work of Toni Morrison was about word work. And what she said in the beginning is so important, that it's sublime because it is generative. It makes meaning that secures our difference, our human difference. We die, that may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives. And the doing is going to be a leitmotif in this talk. The effort that the brain does, the efforts that we do in learning creates the circuitry of our brains. That must never be lost. And because I'm in Italy, I have to give some nod to Italo Calvino when he was really talking about something very essential to language. He was worried that our technology would afflict language, revealing itself as a loss of cognition. And it's this very essence of what does reading, what does writing do to the cognitive processes of the brain? And he used the very important term, extinguishing the spark that shoots out from the collision of words and new thoughts. I need you to keep that in mind, because this is the effort that, as Goethe, von Humboldt, and even Chomsky would say, and Charles Taylor, the philosopher, we possess a drive toward language in which every thought we seek to articulate, every thought from the soul, he said, we seek to articulate. This is something that we must preserve as we face the digital dilemma in whether or not the affordances of reading and writing in a digital area are leading us to a new normal in which length, conceptual complexity, memory, and reflection are potentially lost. Now, our colleague in the Pontifical Academy of Science has asked us all to think about, when we think about any aspect of learning, to think about it as a circuit. And in the area of reading, it's one of the most beautiful examples of how our brain handles something new. It creates a circuit that is plastic, that will be, in fact, changed and transformed by the languages that each of you speak, but it will also be transformed by the medium. The plasticity of the brain, that which allows all of us in this room to look at symbols in different ways, also means that that circuit will be reflecting the medium upon which it is reading or writing. Now, deep reading is something of a concept that I have been using to actually give you a sense of all that goes into the very somewhat seemingly simple act of reading, when it in fact involves all kinds of the circuits and networks of the brain. Very importantly, I will say that one of the aspects of reading that I need us to think about is the use of our affective systems and empathy. And the theologian John Donne talks about empathy as passing over. Now, I think of this with what reading does to a child. It helps them leave the egocentrism of the various developmental stages and learn the thoughts and feelings of others. This is a foundation of wisdom as well as empathy. But just as Leonda talked about critical thinking 3 times in her discussion, critical thinking is at the essence of what we want the child's reading brain to have. It combines analogical thinking, bringing their background knowledge, affective, inferential, but very importantly, bringing all of these cognitive processes to the evaluation of truth. The ability to evaluate information, misinformation, and disinformation is key to the development of the reading brain of our children. If we look, and I use this actually for Marcelo Suarez Orozco and Marcelo Secundo, because he always wanted to bring Thomas Aquinas into every talk. Well, Thomas Aquinas actually gave us a very interesting insight that at the end of reading is contemplation. What I want to suggest to you is that at the end of the reading brain circuit is the ability to think empathically and critically. It, however, requires time. Each of those processes require additional time rather than what is often the case, the skimming that digital mediums in advantage. Now, I will put only one single slide to writing. Those of us who are very concerned about the development of that circuitry, reading and writing are inextricably bound. The labor, the effort that goes into the writing, the articulation of our thoughts, actually is building the circuits of the brain. When we, in fact, over-rely on, let's say, things like ChatGPT and all the designs of devices that will continue into the future, we must not short-circuit the very building that requires in writing now. So I urge you to realize that we have to know these things as we think about the design of AI going forward, that it not short-circuit the very building processes. Now, in the United States, I'm only going to say one thing. We are, at this moment, decreasing our ability to form critical thinking in our young. We have an almost crisis right now in the grades 4 and grade 8, where they are literally not, 1/3 of them are not reading at a basic level, and only a very small percentage in a level that allows fluency. Now, what we know from the study in cognitive neuroscience is that each medium has its costs and weaknesses. And the cost is the amount of time we give to those very sophisticated cognitive and linguistic processes. That's the cost that I want everyone who's involved in design to be thinking about developmentally. And the developmental challenges, just as Ian asked, are considerable. From 0 to 1 year, the impact of digital devices, only 1 year, the first year, is impacting language and what are called the inhibitory or executive function. Now, this is a brand new study from the Journal of Medical. And then we look at the Singapore study, where we look at evidence from 0 to 8, and we see the more digital exposure, the less the attentional systems are able to allocate to critical thinking, and thus academic performance is declining. Now, this is for our young adults, Mariana. This is for the youth. We have studies that go over 171,000 young people, and we simply look at what are the differences between digital medium and print. And what you see is that the more that the person is reading on the print, the better the comprehension of their work. Furthermore, these studies go all the way up into the digital native epochs, And they are even better on print because they think they're better on digital because they're faster. So here we again see the effect of the allocation of time on the system. Now this is for all of you. Most of you are what we call skimmers. You use from eye movement research, we know you use an F or a Z, and then you are word spotting, and Italo Calvino would despair over this slide. The reality, however, is that so many of us use skimming as a defense mechanism because of the bombardment of information we all have. 10, 12 hours a day, we are on the screen. But there's another aspect to this. This is affecting, when we do not allocate attention to these processes, it's affecting our memory. Certainly when we over-rely on our various devices, this is affecting both memory and reflection. Now, a wonderful Jesuit who was the student of Marshall McLuhan said this, Walter Ong: technologies are not mere exterior aids, but interior transformations of consciousness, and never more than when they affect the word. This has to be taken seriously. We are quite literally changing the reading brain circuit with implications that all of us know, and many of you will be speaking of this. But from my standpoint, in terms of cognitive neuroscience, it means we are developing a generation who will be giving less attention, literally as they read and absorb information, to the perspectives of others. They won't have developed in the same way that circuitry, and thus they will be more susceptible to false information, demagoguery, all of which, Joaquim, affects a democratic society. And I use here a dialogue between Umberto Eco and Cardinal Martini, who really speak to the fragility of democracy and its need for a collective conscience. Now, part of my work is to have antidotes, to have proposals that recommend what do we do with this knowledge and use it responsibly. And so I have been working on a proposal in which we are developing these deep reading processes in the first 10 to 12 years. At the same time, those of you who remember your Vygotsky know that we could have parallel lines of development. And I suggest the same, that we have largely print as our mechanism for much of learning for those early years. At the same time, we never forget not only the complementarity, but the development of cognitive skills that programming and coding give our children. So it's never either or. There is nothing about a binary here. It is how do we use knowledge to the best of our ability in designing curricula for children over time. I will end with both Martha Nussbaum and Pope Francis. She said it would be catastrophic to become a nation of technically competent people who have lost the ability to think critically, to examine themselves, and to respect the humanity and diversity of others. At the heart of the reading brain circuit are milliseconds in which we are given a chance, in a Proustian sense, to go into our sanctuary. Proust said that the real aim, the real goal of reading was to go beyond the wisdom of the author to discover our own. This is the moment of contemplation or reflection and rumination. That's at the heart of this gift to the species that we created. And yet we can lose it if we actually develop children who never learn to read critically and empathically, which takes time and effort. Finally, I end with Pope Francis. This was a wonderful essay where he said, he used Hölderlin's Hyperion, where the danger is also grows the saving power. That's the genius in the human story. There's always a way to escape destruction. Where humankind has to act is precisely there in the threat itself. That is where the door opens. And I think the door opens for us today in that very sense. We are facing the threat, we're looking at the beauty and the advantages. And as Neil Postman said, children are the living messages we send to a time we will not see. I hope we take that into consideration in our time together. Thank you so much.